My husband's mistress lost her job, her house, and her children all in the same week. The best part? I never lifted a finger. I'm sitting in my kitchen right now watching the moving truck pull away from the house across town through the live stream on my laptop. Sarah Mitchell, that's her name, though she probably wishes it wasn't, is standing in her empty driveway holding a cardboard box and crying. Her kids are nowhere to be seen. They're with their father now, the one who got full custody after the judge saw what kind of woman she really was. But let me explain how I got here, because this story didn't start with moving trucks and custody battles. It started with a sticky note. My name is Jennifer Walsh, and up until 8 months ago, I thought I had the perfect life. At 34, I was living in a beautiful suburban home in Westfield with my husband Mark and our twin 7-year-old daughters Emma and Sophie. Mark worked as a regional sales manager for a mid-sized tech company, and I had built a successful freelance graphic design business that allowed me to work from home and be there for the girls. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. Mark brought home about $80,000 a year, and my design work added another $40,000. We had a nice house with a 2-car garage, took family vacations to Disney World, and the girls were enrolled in dance classes and soccer. From the outside, we looked like the American dream. I met Mark in college at Ohio State. He was studying business. I was in the art program. He was this confident, charming guy who always knew how to make me laugh. We dated for 3 years, got married right after graduation, and spent the first few years of our marriage building our careers and saving money. When the girls came along, it felt like everything was falling into place. Mark was a good father, or at least I thought he was. He coached the girls' soccer team, helped with homework, and never missed a school play or recital. He was the kind of dad who would get down on the floor and play Barbies, who would read bedtime stories in different voices for each character. The girls adored him. Our marriage wasn't perfect, whose is? But it felt solid. We had our routines. Mark would leave for work at 7:30 each morning, always kissing me goodbye and telling me he loved me. I'd get the girls ready for school, drop them off, and spend the day working on client projects. Mark usually got home around 6. We'd have dinner as a family, help the girls with homework, and then settle in for the evening. Weekends were for family time, trips to the park, barbecues with neighbors, birthday parties. I thought I knew my husband. I thought I knew our life. Mark had always been social, always had a lot of friends from work. He'd go out for drinks with colleagues occasionally, play in a company softball league during the summer, attend work conferences a few times a year. I never thought anything of it. If anything, I was proud that he was well-liked and successful at his job. The company he worked for, Pinnacle Solutions, was one of those mid-level tech firms that provided software solutions to other businesses. Mark had been there for almost 6 years, working his way up from a junior sales position to regional manager. His boss, Tom Bradley, was this older guy who had been with the company for decades. Mark always spoke highly of Tom, said he was like a mentor to him. What I didn't know was that Tom Bradley had a daughter. Sarah Mitchell was 31, divorced, and worked as the office manager at Pinnacle Solutions. She had 2 kids from her previous marriage, a boy and a girl, ages 9 and 6. Her ex-husband, David, was some kind of accountant who had moved to California after their divorce 2 years earlier. Sarah had gotten primary custody of the kids, and David paid child support but rarely visited. I learned all of this later, of course. At the time, I didn't even know Sarah existed. Looking back now, I can see the signs that something was changing. It started small. Mark working late more often, taking calls in the garage or basement where I couldn't hear the conversation, being more protective of his phone. He started going to more work events, staying out later when he did go out, and coming home smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. But these changes happened gradually, over months, and Mark was smart about it. He'd bring me flowers after working late, telling me how much he appreciated my understanding. He'd plan special date nights to make up for missed dinners. What? He'd bring the girls little gifts when he'd been gone for work events. It felt like he was being more attentive, not less. The girls started mentioning a woman named Sarah occasionally. Daddy's friend Sarah bought us ice cream, or Sarah has kids too, Mommy. When I asked Mark about it, he'd explain that Sarah was just someone from the office who happened to be around when he'd taken the girls to company picnics or events. No big deal. I trusted him completely. That was my first mistake. Our sex life had never been amazing, but it wasn't bad either. We'd settle into comfortable routines, making love once or twice a week, usually on weekends when the girls were asleep or busy with other activities. But I started noticing that Mark seemed less interested. He'd come to bed later, claim he was tired more often, or find excuses to sleep in the guest room if one of us was sick. When I tried to talk to him about it, he'd reassure me that everything was fine, that work was just stressful, that he was getting older, and his drive wasn't what it used to be. It seemed reasonable. We were both busy, both tired from juggling work and parenting. I figured it was just a phase. The girls were thriving. Emma was becoming this little artist, always drawing and painting, asking me about my work and wanting to help with design projects. Sophie was more athletic, excelling at soccer and dance, always moving, always full of energy. They were happy kids, well-adjusted, doing well in school. Whatever was going on with Mark and me, it wasn't affecting them, which was what mattered most to me. I had my own life too. I'd built up a solid client base for my graphic design work, mostly small businesses and nonprofits who needed websites, logos, and marketing materials. I loved the creative challenge, and I was good at it. I'd won a few local design awards, and my reputation was growing. I was considering expanding, maybe hiring an assistant or renting office space outside the house. I had friends in the neighborhood, other moms I'd met through the girls' activities. We'd have coffee dates, organize play dates for the kids, support each other through the challenges of parenting and marriage. I felt connected to my community, like I belonged somewhere. My relationship with my parents was good. They lived about 3 hours away, but we visited regularly, and they came for holidays and the girls' birthdays. Mark got along well with them, and they thought he was a wonderful husband and father. My younger sister lived in Chicago with her husband, and we talked on the phone regularly and visited when we could. From every angle, my life looked successful. I had a loving marriage, beautiful children, meaningful work, strong relationships, and financial stability. I was grateful for what I had, and I worked hard to maintain it all. But underneath this perfect surface, my husband was building an entirely different life. Mark had started his affair with Sarah about 4 months before I discovered it. It began, as these things often do, with late nights at the office. Sarah would stay late to help with paperwork or prepare for client meetings. Mark would stay late to work on sales reports or prep for presentations. They'd find themselves alone in the office together, talking about their lives, their struggles, their dreams. Sarah was going through a difficult time. Her divorce had been messy, her ex-husband was unreliable with child support, and she was struggling to make ends meet as a single mother. Mark positioned himself as a shoulder to cry on, a friend who understood the pressures of parenting and work. Sarah was attractive in a different way than I was. Where I was tall and blonde with an artistic bohemian style, Sarah was petite and brunette with a more polished, professional look. She wore fitted skirts and blouses to work, always had her makeup done perfectly, kept her hair in neat styles. She looked like the kind of woman who had her life together even when she didn't. The emotional affair lasted about 6 weeks before it became physical. Mark would tell me he was working late or had client dinners, when really he was taking Sarah out to restaurants in the next town over, places where they were unlikely to run into anyone they knew. They'd talk for hours, sharing intimate details about their marriages, their fears, their desires. Mark told Sarah that our marriage had been struggling for years, that we'd grown apart, that we were basically staying together for the kids. He painted me as cold and distant, focused only on my work and the children, no longer interested in him as a man. None of this was true, but Sarah believed it because she wanted to. When they finally slept together, it was in a hotel room after a supposed client dinner. Mark came home that night and kissed me goodnight, telling me he loved me, while the scent of another woman's perfume clung to his clothes. The affair intensified quickly. They were sleeping together 2 or 3 times a week, always at hotels or at Sarah's house when her kids were with babysitters or at their father's. Mark was spending hundreds of dollars on hotel rooms, dinners, and gifts for Sarah, money that was supposed to be going into our family savings account. Sarah fell hard and fast. She started talking about leaving her job to avoid the awkwardness of the affair, about Mark leaving me, about them building a life together. Mark fed into these fantasies while being careful never to make concrete promises. He was having his cake and eating it too, a stable home life with me and the girls, and an exciting sexual relationship with Sarah. But affairs are hard to hide, especially when they're happening right under everyone's noses at work. Sarah started dressing better, seemed happier, was more confident. Mark was distracted during meetings, constantly checking his phone, taking personal calls. Their colleagues began to notice the way they looked at each other, the way they found excuses to work closely together. Tom Bradley, Mark's boss and Sarah's father, was the last to figure it out. When he did, he was furious. Not just because it was inappropriate workplace behavior, but because Sarah was his daughter, and Mark was married with children. Tom had always liked Mark, had been grooming him for a promotion, had considered him a man of integrity. But Tom didn't confront them immediately. Instead, he started watching, documenting, gathering evidence. He was building a case, though at the time, none of us knew it. None of us knew it. Meanwhile, I was living in blissful ignorance. Mark was actually being more attentive at home, probably out of guilt. He'd bring me coffee in the morning, compliment my work, suggest date nights and family outings. He was trying to ease his conscience by being a better husband, which only made me love him more. The girls were happy. Our finances seemed stable. My work was going well. I thought we were just settling into a comfortable middle-age groove, and I was content with that. I had no idea that my world was about to explode. The discovery came, like it often does, through technology. Mark had always been protective of his phone, but lately he'd become almost paranoid about it. He'd take it with him to the bathroom, keep it face down during dinner, never leave it unattended. When I asked about it, he'd say work was requiring more security protocols, that he was getting sensitive client information that needed to be protected. One morning in early March, Mark was in the shower and his phone was charging on the nightstand. It buzzed with a text message, and I glanced over automatically. Ha! The preview on the lock screen showed a message from S that said, "Can't wait to see you tonight. I love you so much." UK polls. My blood went cold. Mark had told me he was working late that night, that he had a big presentation to prepare for. I stared at that phone for what felt like forever, my mind racing through possible explanations. Maybe it was a client, maybe it was some kind of work thing I didn't understand, but deep down I knew. Yes, knew. I didn't confront Mark immediately. Instead, I did what any rational person would do in the digital age. I started investigating. I waited until Mark left for work, then I sat down at our shared computer and started looking for clues. Mark had always been good about keeping his personal and work emails separate, but he occasionally checked his personal email from our home computer. I knew his password. It was our anniversary date, and I logged into his account. What I found made me sick to my stomach. Dozens of emails between Mark and Sarah going back months. Love letters, sexual messages, plans for secret meetings. Pictures I never wanted to see. Details about hotel rooms and restaurants and weekend trips that Mark had supposedly taken for work. But worse than the sexual content was the emotional betrayal. Mark was sharing intimate details about our marriage, our finances, our children. He was complaining about me to this woman, painting me as a cold, demanding wife who didn't understand him. He was sharing photos of our family, our home, our life, with someone who was actively trying to destroy it. Sarah's messages were even more disturbing. She was pushing Mark to leave me, suggesting ways he could get custody of the girls, calculating how much money he'd have to pay in child support. She was planning our destruction while I was making dinner for the man she was sleeping with. I printed everything. Every email, every photo, every disgusting detail. I made copies and stored them in my car, at my office, with my sister. I was building a case, though I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do with it. That night, when Mark came home from his late meeting, I acted normal. I asked about his day, served dinner, helped the girls with homework, watched TV with him before bed. All while the evidence of his betrayal sat in a folder in my dresser drawer. I felt like I was living in an alternate reality. How long had this been going on? How many lies had he told me? How many times had he kissed me goodnight after being with her? How many family events had he attended while planning his escape? The next day, while Mark was at work and the girls were at school, I called my sister. I told her everything, read her some of the emails, cried until I couldn't breathe. She wanted to drive down immediately, wanted me to throw Mark out, wanted me to call a lawyer, but I wasn't ready for that yet. I needed to understand the full scope of what I was dealing with. I needed to know who Sarah really was, what Mark's plan was, how much danger my family was in. So I did what any smart woman in the digital age would do. I hired a private investigator. The private investigator I hired was named Patricia Chen, and she was exactly what I needed: professional, discreet, and ruthless. I found her through an online search and a few discreet phone calls to women's support groups. Patricia specialized in infidelity cases and had a reputation for being thorough and fast. I met Patricia at a coffee shop in the next town over, bringing with me the printed emails and a detailed timeline of Mark's recent behavior. She listened to everything without judgment, taking notes in a small notebook, asking clarifying questions about dates and locations. I need to know everything, I told her. How long this has been going on, what his intentions are, who this woman really is, and what they're planning. I need to know if my children are in danger, if my finances are at risk, if there are other women. I need the whole truth. Patricia nodded. Most women in your situation only want partial truth. They want to know just enough to make a decision about their marriage. But partial truth is dangerous truth. It leaves you vulnerable. She looked at me directly. You're smart to want everything. The retainer was $3,000, which I paid with money from my business account. Patricia estimated it would take 2 to 3 weeks to get a complete picture of what was happening. While Patricia was doing her investigation, I had to continue living my normal life. I had to wake up next to Mark every morning, make him coffee, kiss him goodbye, pretend that everything was fine. I had to help the girls with homework, attend their soccer games and dance recitals, maintain the facade of our happy family. But inside, I was dying. Every lie Mark told ate away at me. Every time he said he loved me, every time he touched me, every time he played with the girls, I wanted to scream. I was living with a stranger, a man who was capable of deception on a level I couldn't have imagined. The hardest part was protecting the girls. They could sense that something was wrong, kids always can, but I couldn't tell them what. When they asked why I seemed sad, I blamed work stress or headaches. When they asked why Daddy was working so much, I explained that his job was demanding, but that he loved them very much. Emma, our little artist, started drawing pictures of our family where I looked sad and Daddy was missing. Sophie, our athlete, became more clingy, wanting extra hugs and bedtime stories. They knew their world was shifting, even if they didn't understand how. I started having panic attacks. I'd be in the grocery store or at a client meeting, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. My heart would race, my hands would shake, and I'd feel like I was going to die. I made an appointment with my doctor claiming stress and work pressure and got a prescription for anxiety medication. My work suffered. I'd sit at my computer staring at design projects, unable to concentrate. I missed deadlines, had to apologize to clients, turned down new projects because I couldn't trust myself to complete them. The business I'd worked so hard to build was crumbling along with my marriage. I stopped eating regularly. Food tasted like cardboard, and my stomach was constantly churning with anxiety. I lost 15 pounds in 3 weeks, and people started commenting on how thin I looked. I blamed it on a new exercise routine. Sleep became impossible. I'd lie awake next to Mark, listening to him breathe, wondering what he was dreaming about, wondering if he was thinking about her. Sometimes he'd talk in his sleep, mumbling words I couldn't quite make out. I'd study his face in the dark, looking for signs of the man I thought I'd married. The worst moments were when Mark would be affectionate. He'd bring me flowers, suggest date nights, tell me he loved me. I knew he was doing it out of guilt, trying to ease his conscience, but it felt like torture. How could he lie so easily? How could he look me in the eyes and tell me he loved me when he was planning to leave me for another woman? I started questioning everything about our relationship. Had he ever really loved me? Was our entire marriage a lie? Were there other affairs I didn't know about? How many other women had there been over the years? Had he married me just because I was convenient, safe, good wife material? I went through old photos, looking for signs I'd missed. Had he seemed distant at our wedding? Had he been checking out other women at family gatherings? Were there gaps in his stories about work trips and business dinners that I'd been too trusting to question? I stalked Sarah's social media obsessively. Her Facebook profile was mostly private, but I could see her profile pictures and some public posts. She was pretty in a conventional way, with long dark hair and bright smile. Her photos showed her with her children, a boy who looked like he was about 9 and a girl who was maybe 6 or 7. They seemed like normal kids, happy and well-adjusted. Sarah's public posts were mostly about her children's activities, motivational quotes about single motherhood, and shares from parenting blogs. She presented herself as a devoted mother who was successfully navigating life after divorce. There was no mention of Mark, no hints about an affair, nothing that suggested she was destroying someone else's family. But I knew the truth. Behind that carefully curated social media presence was a woman who was sleeping with my husband, planning to steal my life, and poisoning my children's relationship with their father. 2 weeks into Patricia's investigation, she called me with a preliminary report. We met at the same coffee shop, and she handed me a manila folder thick with photographs, documents, and timeline reports. "It's worse than you thought," Patricia said gently, "but it's also better, if that makes sense. You're going to have a lot of options." The photographs showed Mark and Sarah together at restaurants, hotels, her house. There were images of them kissing in parking lots, holding hands while walking into hotel lobbies, embracing in Sarah's driveway. The timestamps showed that this had been going on for almost 6 months, not the 4 months I'd estimated from the emails. But more damaging were the financial records Patricia had uncovered. Mark had been using our joint credit cards to pay for hotels, dinners, and gifts for Sarah. He'd withdrawn cash from our savings account dozens of times, always in small amounts that wouldn't trigger alerts. In total, he'd spent over $8,000 of our family money on his affair. Patricia had also discovered that Mark had been looking at apartments, researching divorce lawyers, and calculating child support payments. He was planning to leave me, but he was being strategic about it, trying to position himself for the best possible outcome. He's not just having an affair, Patricia explained. He's building an exit strategy. The good news is that his planning makes him vulnerable. The bad news is that he's more committed to this than you probably realized. But the most shocking discovery was about Sarah herself. Patricia had done a thorough background check and found some very interesting information. Sarah's divorce hadn't been as amicable as she'd led Mark to believe. Her ex-husband had filed for divorce after discovering that Sarah had been having an affair with her boss at her previous job. The court records showed a pattern of infidelity and dishonesty that had cost Sarah custody of her children during the initial proceedings. She'd only gotten primary custody back after her ex-husband moved to California and couldn't maintain an active parenting schedule. "This woman has a history," Patricia said. "She's done this before. She targets married men in positions of authority, has affairs that destroy marriages, and then moves on to the next situation. Your husband isn't her first victim, and he probably won't be her last." Patricia had also discovered that Sarah was in significant financial trouble. She had credit card debt, was behind on her mortgage, and had borrowed money from several friends and family members. She was looking at Mark not just as a romantic partner, but as a financial lifeline. "She's not in love with your husband," Patricia said bluntly. "She's in love with his stability, his income, and his ability to solve her problems. The question is whether he's smart enough to figure that out before it's too late." As I sat in that coffee shop, looking at photographs of my husband with another woman, reading documentation of his lies and betrayal, I felt something shift inside me. The shock and grief I'd been carrying for weeks was crystallizing into something else: anger. Mark wasn't just having an affair. He was systematically dismantling our family, stealing money from our children's future, and planning to abandon the life we'd built together. He was doing it slowly, carefully, strategically, while pretending to love me and parent our daughters. And Sarah wasn't just a lonely single mother who'd fallen for a married man. She was a predator who had targeted my husband specifically because of what he could provide for her. She was manipulating him into destroying our family to solve her financial problems. But they'd both made a critical mistake. They'd underestimated me. I looked at Patricia across the table and asked the question that would change everything. What would it take to destroy them both? Patricia smiled. Beatrice smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "But on you. That depends on how creative you're willing to get." The final piece of evidence I needed came from an unexpected source: my 7-year-old daughter, Emma. It was a Saturday morning in late March, and Mark had told me he needed to go into the office for a few hours to catch up on paperwork. This had become a regular occurrence over the past few months, and I'd stopped questioning it. I knew where he was really going. Emma and Sophie were in the living room, working on art projects while I cleaned the kitchen. Emma was drawing with her new set of colored pencils, creating one of her elaborate family portraits. She was incredibly detailed for a 7-year-old, always including every family member, pet, and friend in her pictures. "Mommy," Emma called out, "how do you spell Sarah?" I froze, my hands still submerged in dishwater. "Why do you need to spell Sarah, sweetie?" Emma held up her drawing. It was a picture of our family, but it included a woman I didn't recognize. Dark hair, wearing a blue dress, standing very close to the figure that was obviously Mark. "I'm drawing all of us, and Daddy's special friend Sarah. She was at his office when we visited last week." My heart stopped. "When did you visit Daddy's office?" "Remember? When you were at that client meeting and Daddy picked us up from school? He said we could see where he works, and Sarah was there. She gave us candy and showed us pictures of her kids." Sophie looked up from her coloring book. "Sarah has a boy and a girl, just like us. And she told Daddy she loved him." The room started spinning. Mark had taken our children to meet his mistress. He'd brought Emma and Sophie into his affair, made them complicit in his lies. They'd seen this woman tell their father she loved him, and they thought it was normal. I sat down heavily at the kitchen table, trying to process what I was hearing. "What else do you remember about Sarah?" Emma was happy to share, oblivious to the bombshell she was dropping. "She's really pretty, and she has a nice office with pictures of her kids everywhere. She told us that she and Daddy work really close together, and that maybe someday we could all go to the park together." Sophie nodded enthusiastically. "And she said we were lucky to have such a wonderful daddy, and that she hoped we could be friends." I felt bile rising in my throat. Sarah had met my children. She'd spoken to them about their father, about future plans. She'd used them to get closer to Mark, to make herself seem like a natural part of our family structure. "Did Daddy tell you not to mention Sarah to me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Emma looked confused. "No, why would he do that? Sarah seems nice. Don't you want to meet her?" Sophie added, "Daddy said you were really busy with work and probably wouldn't have time to come to the office, but that may be another time." So Mark hadn't explicitly told them to keep it secret, he'd just assumed they wouldn't mention it, or that if they did, he could explain it away as a casual work interaction. He'd underestimated both his children's honesty and my ability to read between the lines. I spent the rest of the day questioning the girls gently, learning more about their visit to Mark's office. They'd spent about an hour there, meeting several of Mark's colleagues, seeing his workspace, and spending significant time with Sarah. Sarah had given them candy, asked them about school and their activities, and shown them pictures of her own children. What disturbed me most was how comfortable the girls seemed with Sarah, how naturally they spoke about her. This wasn't their first encounter with this woman. They talked about her like they'd known her for a while. How many other times had Mark exposed our children to his affair? That evening, when Mark came home from his office work, I acted completely normal. I asked about his day, served dinner, helped the girls with homework. But inside, I was seething. He'd crossed a line I didn't even know existed. Involving our children in his affair was unforgivable. After the girls were asleep, I called Patricia. I told her what I'd learned and asked her to expand her investigation to include any other interactions between Mark, Sarah, and my children. "This changes everything," Patricia said. "If he's involving the children in the affair, he's not just planning to leave you, he's planning to replace you. He's positioning Sarah as a potential stepmother, testing how the kids react to her." What does that mean for me legally? It means you have him dead to rights on parental alienation and child endangerment. No family court judge wants to see children manipulated into accepting a parent's affair partner. It also means he's more committed to this relationship than we initially thought. Patricia's expanded investigation revealed even more disturbing information. Mark had taken the girls to Sarah's house twice, ostensibly for playdates with Sarah's children, while Mark and Sarah worked on projects. The children had been instructed to tell me they'd gone to a colleague's house to play with work friends' kids. Not technically a lie, but definitely deceptive. Sarah had been actively courting my children, buying them small gifts, asking them about their interests, positioning herself as a fun, cool adult who understood them. She was grooming them to accept her as part of their family structure. Mark had also been sharing information about the girls' schedules, school activities, and personal preferences with Sarah. She knew their favorite foods, their bedtimes, their friends' names, their teachers. She was building a relationship with my children behind my back, using information provided by their own father. The financial investigation had also expanded. Mark had opened a separate credit card that I didn't know about, and he'd been using it to pay for activities with Sarah and her children. Zoo visits, movie tickets, restaurant meals, arcade games. He was building an alternative family life with our money. Most damaging of all, Patricia had discovered that Mark and Sarah had looked at houses together. They'd toured rental properties, discussed school districts for their combined 4 children, and calculated household budgets based on Mark's income and Sarah's projected earnings. They weren't just having an affair. They were planning to blend their families, with Mark taking on the role of stepfather to Sarah's children, while Sarah became stepmother to mine. They were building a whole new life together, and they were using my children as test subjects for their compatibility. The discovery that pushed me over the edge came from the most mundane source, our family cell phone bill. I'd never paid much attention to the detailed call and text logs before, trusting Mark to handle most of our household bills. But Patricia had suggested I start reviewing all our financial documents, looking for patterns and evidence. When I opened the cell phone statement for March, I saw hundreds of text messages and phone calls between Mark's number and an unknown number that I now knew belonged to Sarah. But what caught my attention were the timestamps. Mark had been texting Sarah during Emma's dance recital. He'd called her during Sophie's soccer game. He'd exchanged dozens of messages with her during our family dinner at my parents' house. He'd been in constant communication with his mistress during every family event, every milestone, every moment that should have been about us. I scrolled back through months of phone records, seeing the pattern emerge. Mark had been living a double life so completely that he couldn't even disconnect from Sarah long enough to be present for his own family. While I was taking pictures of the girls at Christmas morning, he was texting Sarah. While we were celebrating the girls' birthday party, he was planning his next meeting with her. The most devastating discovery was a series of calls made during our family vacation to the beach in February. Mark had told me he needed to check in with work occasionally, and I'd encouraged him to take the calls he needed so he could relax and enjoy our time together. Instead, he'd been calling Sarah, describing our hotel room, our activities, our children's behavior. He'd been sharing our private family moments with the woman who was planning to replace me. I printed out 6 months of phone records and highlighted every call and text to Sarah's number. The evidence was overwhelming. Mark had been more in communication with his mistress than with his own wife. He'd been prioritizing their relationship over his marriage, even during supposedly sacred family time. But the final straw came when I discovered a voicemail. Mark had saved voicemails in his phone from Sarah, including one that he'd apparently listened to over and over again. I found it when I was looking through his phone one morning while he was in the shower. The anxiety medication I was taking had made me bold in ways I never expected. Sarah's voice was soft and sweet as she talked about missing Mark, about loving him, about looking forward to their future together. But then her tone changed, and she started talking about me and the girls. I know this is hard, baby, but you can't keep putting Jennifer and the girls before us forever. I need to know that you're serious about building a life with me and my kids. I need to know that you're going to choose us. She went on to describe a timeline for Mark leaving me, suggestions for how to handle custody arrangements, and plans for introducing all 4 children to each other as siblings. She talked about our house, our finances, our personal belongings, as if they were already hers to claim. But the part that broke me was when she started talking about my parenting. The girls are sweet, but they're going to need structure when they come to live with us. Jennifer has been too permissive with them, and they'll need to learn how our family works. Don't worry, I'm good with kids, and I'll help them adjust. She was planning to take my children and reparent them. She was critiquing my mothering while planning to take over my role. She was discussing my daughters like they were acquisitions in a business deal. I sat on the bathroom floor listening to this woman plan the theft of my entire life, and something inside me snapped. Not broke, snapped, like a rubber band pulled too tight that suddenly whips back with violent force. They thought they were so smart, so careful, so strategic. They thought I was the naive wife who would eventually discover the affair and quietly agree to a divorce that gave them everything they wanted. They thought I would prioritize the children's stability over my own dignity, that I would make their transition easy and painless. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I deleted the voicemail from Mark's phone, put it back exactly where I'd found it, and went downstairs to make breakfast for my family. I kissed Mark goodbye when he left for work, helped the girls get ready for school, and dropped them off with smiles and hugs. Then I drove to Patricia's office and told her it was time to destroy them both. "What's your timeline, Liz?" Patricia asked. "How long do you need to get everything ready?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. Depends on how thorough you want to be. I thought about Mark texting Sarah during our daughter's dance recital. I thought about Sarah planning to restructure my children's lives. I thought about the voicemail where she'd criticized my parenting while planning to steal my family. "I want to be thorough," I said. "I want to be devastating. And I want them to never see it coming." Patricia smiled that dangerous smile again. "Then let's get started," I basiced. Patricia and I spent the next 3 weeks building what she called the most comprehensive case file I've ever assembled. We weren't just gathering evidence of the affair, we were mapping out every vulnerability, every weakness, every potential pressure point in both Mark's and Sarah's lives. The first step was expanding the financial investigation. Patricia hired a forensic accountant who specialized in hidden assets and financial deception. What we discovered was worse than I'd imagined. Mark hadn't just been spending our money on his affair, he'd been systematically redirecting funds from our family accounts into investments and savings that I couldn't access. He'd opened accounts at different banks, changed the direct deposit for part of his salary, and moved money in small increments that wouldn't trigger automatic alerts. Over the course of 8 months, Mark had essentially stolen nearly $25,000 from our family. Money that was supposed to go toward the girls' college funds, our mortgage payments, and household expenses had been funneled into accounts that only he could access. He was building a financial foundation for his new life with Sarah while impoverishing his existing family. The forensic accountant also discovered that Mark had been inflating his business expenses, claiming personal purchases as work-related costs, and manipulating his tax withholdings to increase his take-home pay. He'd been committing tax fraud while stealing from his own children. "This isn't just infidelity," the accountant explained. "This is financial abuse on a massive scale. He's been systematically weakening your financial position while strengthening his own." But Mark's financial crimes were nothing compared to what we discovered about Sarah. Patricia's deeper investigation revealed that Sarah's financial troubles were much more serious than we'd initially realized. She wasn't just behind on her mortgage, she was 3 months behind and facing foreclosure. Her credit cards were maxed out, she owed money to multiple creditors, and she'd borrowed substantial amounts from family members and friends. More damaging, Sarah had a history of financial fraud. She'd been fired from her previous job for embezzling money from petty cash and falsifying expense reports. The incident hadn't resulted in criminal charges because the company hadn't wanted the negative publicity, but the documentation was still in her personnel file. Sarah had also been lying to Mark about her child support situation. She'd told him that her ex-husband was unreliable with payments, but the court records showed that David was current on all his obligations. Sarah had been receiving $1,500 a month in child support while telling Mark that she was struggling financially as a single mother. "She's not a victim," Patricia explained. "She's a predator who targets financially stable men to solve her money problems. Your husband is just her latest mark." But the most useful discovery was about Sarah's custody arrangement. While she had primary custody of her children, the divorce decree included a morality clause that could be invoked if she was found to be engaging in behavior that was detrimental to the children's welfare. Specifically, the clause mentioned adultery and exposing the children to inappropriate relationships. David, Sarah's ex-husband, had moved to California for work, but he'd maintained his legal right to seek custody modifications if circumstances changed. Patricia reached out to him through a mutual contact and discovered that he'd been concerned about Sarah's parenting choices, but hadn't felt he could do anything from across the country. "He's been looking for a reason to seek custody," Patricia told me. "He just needs documentation of behavior that violates the morality clause." We also investigated Tom Bradley, Sarah's father and Mark's boss. Tom was 63 years old, a lifelong company man who'd built his career on integrity and professionalism. He'd been with Pinnacle Solutions for over 20 years and was highly respected in the industry. Tom had no idea about the affair between his daughter and his employee. He thought Sarah was doing well as a single mother, gradually rebuilding her life after her divorce. He'd been proud of Mark's professional development and had been planning to recommend him for a significant promotion. Patricia discovered that Tom was old school about workplace relationships and had strong opinions about infidelity based on his own experience. His wife had cheated on him early in their marriage, and while they'd reconciled, Tom had never forgotten the pain of betrayal. He'd built strict policies about workplace relationships at Pinnacle Solutions and had fired employees for affairs in the past. "If Tom finds out about Mark and Sarah, he'll fire them both immediately," Patricia said. "But we need to control how and when he finds out." The investigation also revealed vulnerabilities in Mark's professional reputation. He'd been telling clients and colleagues that he was happily married, using our family's stability as part of his sales pitch. Several major clients had specifically mentioned trusting Mark because he seemed like a solid family man. Mark was also up for a significant promotion that would include relocation to the company's headquarters in another state. He told me he wasn't interested in moving the family, but Patricia discovered that he'd actually been pursuing the position aggressively. The promotion would come with a 50% salary increase and stock options that would be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars over time. "He's been planning to take the promotion and move with Sarah," Patricia explained. "He was going to present it to you as a fait accompli. Either you and the girls move with him, or he takes the job and you get divorced." But Mark had made a critical error in his planning. The promotion required a security clearance that included a thorough background check and financial review. If Mark's affair and financial improprieties were discovered during that process, he wouldn't just lose the promotion, he'd likely lose his current job and become unemployable in his industry. With all this information, Patricia and I began planning what she called coordinated exposure. The goal wasn't just to reveal the affair, but to ensure that both Mark and Sarah faced maximum consequences for their actions while protecting me and the girls. The plan had multiple phases that would unfold over the course of a single week. Phase 1 would target Sarah's custody situation. Patricia would provide David with comprehensive documentation of Sarah's affair, including evidence that she'd been exposing their children to inappropriate relationships and lying about her financial situation. David would file for emergency custody based on the morality clause in their divorce decree. Phase 2 would involve Tom Bradley and Pinnacle Solutions. Tom would receive an anonymous package containing evidence of the affair between his daughter and his employee, including documentation of how they'd been using company time and resources for their personal relationship. The package would also include information about Mark's financial improprieties and how they might affect his security clearance application. Phase 3 would target Mark's promotion prospects. The security clearance investigators would receive an anonymous tip about Mark's affair and financial irregularities, triggering a more thorough background check that would reveal everything we discovered. Phase 4 would be the personal confrontation. I would present Mark with divorce papers and evidence of everything I knew, but only after the other phases had already begun and he had no way to minimize the damage to his career and reputation. Phase 5 would involve the financial recovery. The forensic accountant would help me file claims to recover the money Mark had stolen and pursue legal action for his financial fraud. The beauty of this plan, Patricia explained, is that each phase reinforces the others. By the time Mark realizes what's happening, he'll be dealing with multiple crises simultaneously and won't be able to focus on damage control. But the most important part of the plan was protecting Emma and Sophie. I consulted with a child psychologist about how to handle the revelation of their father's affair and the upcoming divorce. I'd also spoken with a family law attorney about custody arrangements and ensuring that the girls' stability was prioritized throughout the process. The attorney had been impressed with the evidence we'd gathered. "You're not just documenting an affair," she'd said. "You're documenting a pattern of deception, financial abuse, and child endangerment that will give you significant leverage in custody negotiations." I'd also been preparing emotionally for the confrontation. The anxiety medication was helping, but I'd also started seeing a therapist who specialized in betrayal trauma. I was learning to separate my anger at Mark from my need to protect my children, and I was developing strategies for staying calm and focused during what would inevitably be a volatile situation. Ha ha! The therapist had helped me understand that my desire for revenge wasn't unhealthy. It was a natural response to systematic abuse and betrayal. "You're not seeking revenge for the sake of cruelty," she'd explained. "You're seeking justice and protection for yourself and your children. There's a difference." As the plan came together, I felt a sense of clarity and purpose that I hadn't experienced in months. For the first time since discovering the affair, I felt like I had some control over my situation. Mark and Sarah had been playing a game where only they knew the rules, but now I was changing the game entirely. The date was set for the second week of April. Patricia had confirmed that Tom Bradley would be in the office that week, that David was available to file custody papers in California, and that Mark's security clearance investigation was scheduled to begin the following Monday. Everything was ready. All I had to do was push the first domino and watch their carefully constructed lies collapse around them. The night before I set the plan in motion, I sat in the girls' room while they slept, watching their peaceful faces and thinking about the life I was about to destroy to save the life I wanted to build. Emma had her art supplies scattered across her nightstand, including the drawing she'd made of our family with Sarah included. Sophie had her soccer trophy on her dresser, the one Mark had been so proud to help her win. They loved their father completely and unconditionally, the way children should. Why? Tomorrow, I was going to shatter their understanding of who their father was and what our family meant. I was going to introduce them to concepts like infidelity, divorce, and custody arrangements. I was going to force them to grow up faster than any child should have to. But I was also going to protect them from a father who was willing to use them as props in his affair and a woman who saw them as obstacles to overcome. I was going to ensure that they understood their worth and knew that someone would always fight for them. I kissed both girls goodnight and whispered the same promise to each of them: "I will always protect you, no matter what." The next morning, I woke up before dawn and made coffee in my quiet kitchen. Mark was still sleeping, probably dreaming about his secret life and his future plans. In a few hours, that future would cease to exist. I opened my laptop and sent the first email that would begin the destruction of everything Mark and Sarah had built together. There was no going back now. Monday morning, April 14th, I woke up at 5:03 a.m. and went through my normal routine. I made coffee, showered, got dressed, and prepared breakfast for the family. Mark came downstairs at his usual time, kissed me goodbye, and told me he loved me. Or he had no idea that by the end of the week his entire life would be in ruins. The first phase had already begun. Over the weekend, Patricia had overnighted a comprehensive package to David Mitchell in San Diego, containing evidence of Sarah's affair, her financial deceptions, and documentation of how she'd been exposing their children to inappropriate relationships. David's attorney was filing emergency custody papers that morning, citing the morality clause in their divorce decree. At 8:15 a.m., I received a text from Patricia: "Package 1 delivered. He's filing today." Phase 2 began at 9:30 a.m. when Tom Bradley arrived at Pinnacle Solutions to find an anonymous package waiting on his desk. Inside was a detailed report about the affair between his daughter and his employee, complete with photographs, hotel receipts, and email exchanges. The package also included information about Mark's financial improprieties and how they could affect his pending security clearance. Patricia had positioned herself in the Pinnacle Solutions parking lot with a telephoto lens, documenting Tom's reaction for our records. At 9:47 a.m., she texted me. Tom just stormed out of his office toward Mark's. Wow, this is happening. Mark called me at 10:05 a.m., his voice shaky and confused. Jen, something weird is happening at work. Tom wants to see me in his office immediately, and he looks furious about something. I have no idea what's going on. I'm sure it's nothing serious, I said calmly. Maybe there's a problem with a client or a project. You'll figure it out. Yeah, you're probably right. I'll call you later. He never got the chance. Patricia texted me updates throughout the morning. Tom had confronted Mark with the evidence, demanding an explanation. Mark had initially tried to deny everything, but the documentation was too comprehensive. When Tom realized that Mark had been using company time and resources for the affair and that he'd been lying on financial documents that could compromise his security clearance, he'd exploded. The confrontation had been loud enough that several employees heard it through Tom's closed office door. Mark was fired immediately, escorted out by security, and told that he was banned from company property. Tom had also called Sarah into his office, terminated her employment, and made it clear that she was no longer welcome in his life. At 11:30 a.m., Patricia sent me a photo of Mark sitting in his car in the Pinnacle Solutions parking lot, head in his hands, clearly in shock. He's been out there for 20 minutes, she texted. I don't think he knows what to do next. Phase 3 was already in motion. The anonymous tip to Mark's security clearance investigators had triggered an immediate review of his application. By lunchtime, they'd contacted Pinnacle Solutions to verify his employment status and had learned about his termination. The promotion he'd been counting on was dead. Sarah's day was about to get much worse. At 2:00 p.m. Pacific Time, David's attorney served her with emergency custody papers at her home. The papers detailed her affair with Mark, her financial deceptions, and her violation of the morality clause. David was seeking immediate full custody of their children, with Sarah relegated to supervised visitation until a full hearing could be scheduled. Patricia had coordinated with an investigator in California to document Sarah's reaction. The photos showed her standing in her doorway, reading the papers with obvious shock and panic. By 3:00 p.m., she was on the phone with a lawyer, trying to understand how her life had just imploded. Mark finally came home at 4:00 p.m., 2 hours before his normal time. I was in the kitchen, preparing dinner as if nothing had happened. He walked in looking like he'd aged 10 years in a single day. Jen, we need to talk, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Of course. Let me just finish chopping these vegetables. How was your day? He stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. Lighter, how was my day? Jen, I was fired. Fired me. I don't. Jant? He sat down heavily at the kitchen table, putting his head in his hands. I continued preparing dinner, my movements calm and deliberate. Fired? That's terrible. What happened? Someone sent Tom information about. Why? He stopped, realizing he was about to confess to the affair I wasn't supposed to know about. Someone made allegations about improper behavior at work. Work! Tom wouldn't listen to my explanation. He terminated me immediately. What kind of improper behavior? I asked innocently, still focusing on the vegetables. Mark was quiet for a long moment. I could feel him trying to figure out how much I knew, how much he could safely admit. There were suggestions that I was having inappropriate relationships with colleagues. Were you? Another long pause. Oh! Jen, things have been complicated lately. I haven't been completely honest with you about everything. I finally turned to look at him directly. What haven't you been honest about, Mark? He took a shaky breath. I've been having an affair with Sarah Mitchell, Tom's daughter. It's been going on for several months and someone found out and told Tom. That's why I was fired. I nodded calmly, as if he'd just told me he'd forgotten to buy milk. I see. And what are you planning to do about it? Mark looked confused by my lack of reaction. I don't know. I need to figure out what this means for us, for the family. I need to find another job. I need to. Where are the girls going to go to school next year? I interrupted. What? Girls. Where are they going to go to school? Because you've been planning to move with Sarah, haven't you? You applied for that promotion in headquarters, the one that requires relocation. You've been planning to take Sarah and her children with you. Mark's face went white. Yeah, do you? Who told you? I know about the apartment hunting. I know about the financial planning. I know about the $25,000 you've stolen from our family accounts. I know about the credit card you opened without telling me. I know about the tax fraud and the security clearance investigation. I walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up a manila folder that I'd placed there earlier. I also know about Sarah's history of affairs, her financial troubles, her custody issues, and her plans to restructure our children's lives. Mark stood up slowly, like a man in a dream. Jen, I can explain everything. This isn't what you think. Sarah and I, we never meant for it to happen this way. How did you mean for it to happen? We were going to tell you. We were going to work out custody arrangements that were fair to everyone. We were going to make sure the girls were okay with everything before we made any major changes. I opened the folder and pulled out Emma's drawing, the one that showed Sarah as part of our family. Like, you mean like this? Like taking our 7-year-old daughters to meet your mistress and letting them think she was just a nice woman from your office? Mark's legs seemed to give out, and he sat back down hard. Girls, how much do they know? They know that Daddy has a special friend named Sarah who tells him she loves him. They know that Sarah wants to be friends with them. They know that Daddy takes them to Sarah's house to play with her children. I pulled out printed emails from the folder. They don't know that Daddy calls Mommy cold and demanding when he's talking to Sarah. They don't know that Sarah thinks Mommy is too permissive and that the girls need more structure when they come to live with her. I walked over to Mark and placed the folder on the table in front of him. But they're going to know all of this because I'm not going to lie to them about who their father really is. Mark opened the folder with trembling hands and started looking through the evidence. Photos of him and Sarah together, printouts of their email exchanges, financial records showing his theft, documentation of his job termination. Page after page of proof that his secret life was secret no longer. "This is impossible," he whispered. "How did you get all this? How long have you known?" "I've known about Sarah for 6 weeks. I've been investigating both of you for a month. I know everything, Mark." He looked up at me with something that might have been respect if it hadn't been overshadowed by terror. "You did this. You orchestrated everything that happened today. I documented everything that happened over the past 6 months. You orchestrated it. I just made sure the right people found out about it." Mark started flipping through the folder more frantically. "The security clearance investigation. Like, you did that too? Anonymous tip about financial irregularities and undisclosed relationships. They're very thorough about those things, I've heard. And Sarah's custody situation? Her ex-husband deserved to know what kind of environment his children were living in. Turns out he's been worried about Sarah's parenting choices for a while. He just needed documentation to act on his concerns." Mark stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "I don't understand. I don't understand. You could have just confronted me. We could have worked this out like adults. Why did you have to destroy everything?" I sat down across from him at the table where we'd shared thousands of family meals, where we'd helped our daughters with homework, where we'd planned our future together. "Because you weren't planning to work anything out, Mark. You were planning to steal our children's college money, abandon your family, and move across the country with a woman who was using you to solve her financial problems. You were planning to force me into a divorce where I had no leverage and no preparation." I pulled out one more document from the folder, the divorce papers I'd had prepared. "So I'm giving you what you wanted, just not on the terms you expected." Mark read the first page of the divorce filing, his face growing paler with each line. "You're asking for full custody, primary custody, with supervised visitation for you, at least until we can establish that you're capable of putting our children's welfare ahead of your own desires." Greed! Greed! "Jen, you can't do this. You can't take my kids away from me. I'm not taking them away from you, Mark. I'm protecting them from you. There's a difference." He looked at the custody provisions again. "Supervised visitation? You're treating me like I'm some kind of dangerous criminal. You stole $25,000 from your own children's future. You exposed them to your affair partner without my knowledge or consent. You've been planning to uproot their lives to accommodate your relationship with a woman who has a history of financial fraud and relationship manipulation." I leaned forward slightly. "Tell me how that doesn't qualify as dangerous." Mark was quiet for several minutes, reading through the divorce papers and the evidence against him. Finally, he looked up at me with something that might have been genuine remorse. "I never wanted to hurt you or the girls. I know that's hard to believe now, but it's true. Things with Sarah, they just balled. I didn't plan for any of this to happen. But once it did happen, you chose to lie about it for months. You chose to steal money from our family. You chose to involve our children in your deception. You chose to plan a future that didn't include the life we'd built together. I stood up and walked back to the counter. Those were all choices, Mark, and choices have consequences. What happens now? Now, you call a lawyer. You figure out how to explain to Emma and Sophie why Daddy won't be living with us anymore. You find a new job, assuming anyone will hire you after what happened today. You deal with the fact that Sarah's children will probably be living with their father in California, so that relationship is effectively over. I turn back to face him, and you learn to live with the knowledge that you destroyed the best thing you ever had for something that was never real in the first place. Mark looked at me with a mixture of admiration and terror. I underestimated you. You did, but that wasn't your biggest mistake. What it was? What was? Your biggest mistake was underestimating how much I love our daughters. You thought I'd prioritize keeping our family together over protecting them from you. You thought I'd enable your behavior to avoid the trauma of divorce. I walked over to the kitchen window and looked out at the yard where Emma and Sophie would be playing soon. You forgot that a mother's first job is protecting her children, even if that means protecting them from their own father. When I turned back around, Mark was crying, ugly, broken sobs that shook his whole body. I'm so sorry, Jen. I'm so fucking sorry. I know I don't deserve it, but is there any way we can fix this? Any way we can work through this? I looked at my husband, the man I'd loved for 15 years, the father of my children, the person I trusted with my entire life, and felt nothing but pity. The time to fix this was before you started the affair. The time to work through this was before you stole our money. The time to think about our family was before you took our daughters to meet your mistress. I picked up the divorce papers from the table. Now the only thing left to work through is how we're going to co-parent our children while living separate lives. Mark wiped his eyes and tried to compose himself. Where will I go? What am I supposed to do? That's not my problem anymore, Mark. You'll figure it out. The front door opened, and I heard Emma and Sophie calling out their hellos. They were home from after-school care, full of energy and stories about their day. In a few minutes, I'd have to tell them that their family was about to change forever. But for now, they were still innocent. For now, they still believed that Daddy was the hero of their story, that our family was safe and stable, that the future held only good things. Go upstairs, I told Mark quietly. Wash your face and try to look normal. We'll tell the girls together after dinner. They deserve to hear this from both of us. Mark nodded and headed toward the stairs, moving like a man walking to his own execution. As I heard Emma and Sophie's voices getting closer to the kitchen, I took a deep breath and prepared to be the strong, stable parent they needed me to be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new complications, new pain. But tonight I was still their mother, and I was going to protect them through whatever came next. Lady, Sophie called out as she bounded into the kitchen. Guess what happened at school today? I smiled and opened my arms for her hug, already planning how to rebuild our life from the ashes of the one Mark had destroyed. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new kitchen, watching Emma and Sophie do homework at the breakfast bar while dinner simmers on the stove. Our new house is smaller than our old one, but it's ours. No shared mortgage with a lying ex-husband, no memories of betrayal in every room, no ghosts of a marriage that was built on deception. The transition wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And as I watch my daughters thriving in their new environment, I know I made the right choice. The immediate aftermath of that April confrontation was brutal, but swift. Mark moved out the next day, staying in a hotel while he looked for an apartment he could afford on unemployment benefits. The girls handled the news better than I'd expected. Children are remarkably resilient when they're given honest information and consistent support. Emma, our little artist, processed the divorce through her drawings. For weeks, she created elaborate pictures of 2 houses with the girls moving between them, showing how love could exist in multiple places, even when families lived separately. Sophie, our athlete, threw herself into soccer and dance with renewed intensity, using physical activity to work through her emotions. The custody arrangement we ultimately reached was fair but protective. Mark gets the girls every other weekend and 1 evening per week, all supervised by a court-appointed monitor until he completes a year of family therapy. The girls are also seeing their own counselor, who reports that they're adjusting well and show no signs of long-term trauma. Mark found a new job after 3 months of searching, but it's a significant step down from his previous position. He's working as a junior sales associate for a small local company, making about half what he earned at Pinnacle Solutions. The security clearance investigation resulted in a permanent flag on his record, making him unemployable in his previous industry. More importantly, Mark has had to confront the reality of what his choices cost him. He lost his family, his career, his financial stability, and his reputation in a single week. He's been forced to rebuild his entire life from scratch, with the knowledge that he destroyed the best thing he ever had for something that was never real. Sarah's situation was even more devastating. Though I can't say I feel sorry for her, David's emergency custody filing was successful. The family court in California reviewed the evidence of Sarah's affair, her financial deceptions, and her violation of the morality clause, and awarded David full custody of their children. Sarah was granted supervised visitation every other weekend, contingent on her completing parenting classes and financial counseling. Sarah fought the custody decision for 2 months, spending thousands of dollars she didn't have on legal fees, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. Her own father, Tom Bradley, testified about her history of workplace inappropriate relationships and her current financial instability. The judge ruled that the children's welfare required them to live with their father in California. Sarah lost her house to foreclosure in June when she could no longer make mortgage payments without her job at Pinnacle Solutions. She moved in with a friend temporarily, but that arrangement fell apart when Sarah couldn't contribute to household expenses. Last I heard, she was living in a studio apartment across town, working as a receptionist at a dental office, and struggling to pay for supervised visits with her children. The relationship between Mark and Sarah didn't survive the destruction of their respective lives. When they lost their jobs, their children, and their financial stability simultaneously, they turned on each other. Mark blamed Sarah for manipulating him into destroying his marriage. Sarah blamed Mark for not being honest about the risks of their affair. Their love story, such as it was, disintegrated under the pressure of real consequences. They haven't spoken in months. The financial recovery took longer than I'd hoped, but it was largely successful. The forensic accountant helped me recover $18,000 of the $25,000 Mark had stolen, and Mark was ordered to pay the remaining amount as part of the divorce settlement. He also had to cover my legal fees and provide additional compensation for the financial fraud. I kept the house initially, but decided after a few months that too many painful memories were embedded in those walls. I sold it for a good profit and bought a smaller place in a different neighborhood, closer to the girls' schools and my friend network. The divorce settlement, combined with the house sale and my growing freelance business, left me in a much stronger financial position than I'd expected. My business has actually thrived since the divorce. Word spread about my resilience and strategic thinking during the marriage crisis, and several clients have referred me to friends and colleagues who admire my professionalism under pressure. I've expanded to include brand consulting and digital marketing, and I'm considering hiring my first employee. The girls are doing wonderfully. Emma's art has become more sophisticated and confident. Her recent pieces show strong, independent women in various settings, and she started selling small pieces to neighbors and family friends. Sophie made the select soccer team this year and has discovered a love of coding through an after-school program. Both girls have adapted to the custody schedule and actually seem to enjoy having 2 homes. They've learned to pack efficiently, keep duplicate sets of important items, and navigate the emotional complexities of loving a parent who made serious mistakes. They're developing resilience and independence that will serve them well throughout their lives. My relationship with Mark has settled into a functional co-parenting arrangement. He completed his required therapy and has been working to rebuild trust with the girls. He's more present and attentive during his visits than he ever was when we were married, perhaps because he now understands what he stands to lose. I don't hate Mark anymore. I've moved beyond anger into something more like indifference. He's the father of my children, and he's working to be a better man than he was during our marriage. That's enough for me. I don't need him to be anything more than an adequate co-parent and a reliable source of child support. The psychological impact of everything I went through has been significant, but manageable. I continued therapy throughout the divorce process and for several months afterward, working through the betrayal trauma and learning to trust my own judgment again. I've learned to separate Mark's deception from my own worth, and I've developed a much clearer sense of my own strength and capabilities. I'm dating again, though cautiously. I've met a few men through friends and online, and I'm enjoying the process of rediscovering who I am as a single woman. I'm not in a rush to remarry or blend families. I want to be very sure about any future partner, and I want the girls to be older before I introduce serious complications into their lives. But I'm open to love again when the right person comes along. I've learned that I'm capable of surviving betrayal, rebuilding my life, and protecting my children from harm. I'm confident in my ability to recognize red flags and enforce boundaries. I'm no longer the naive wife who trusted completely and questioned nothing. The most satisfying aspect of this whole experience has been proving to myself that I'm much stronger and smarter than anyone gave me credit for, including me. For years, I'd defined myself primarily as Mark's wife and the girl's mother. I'd subsumed my own identity into my family roles, trusting others to make major decisions and assuming that my primary value was as a support system for other people's dreams. The affair and divorce forced me to rediscover my own agency. I had to make difficult decisions, execute complex plans, and advocate for my children's welfare without anyone else's help. I had to become the strategist, the investigator, the protector, and the provider all at once. And I was good at it. I was better at it than Mark was at hiding his affair, better than Sarah was at manipulating situations to her advantage, better than either of them anticipated. I out-thought them, outplanned them, and out-executed them at every turn. The woman who hired Patricia Chen and orchestrated the destruction of Mark and Sarah's plans bears little resemblance to the woman who used to make coffee for her cheating husband every morning. I've kept the best parts of who I was, the loving mother, the creative professional, the loyal friend, while adding new dimensions of strength, independence, and strategic thinking. My friends and family have been amazed by the transformation. My sister jokes that I should start a consulting business for betrayed wives, helping them navigate divorce proceedings and custody arrangements. My mother, who worried for years that I was too trusting and passive, now brags to her friends about her daughter's strength and resilience. The girls have noticed the change, too. Emma told me recently that I seem more like myself now than I did when I was married to their father. Sophie said I seem happier and more confident. They're proud of how I handled the divorce, proud of the new life I've built for us, proud to have a mother who fought for them when it mattered. Looking back, I can see that Mark's affair was actually a gift, though not one I would have chosen. It forced me to confront realities I'd been avoiding and develop strengths I didn't know I possessed. It freed me from a marriage that was built on lies and showed me what I was capable of when I stopped depending on others to define my worth. I'm not grateful for the betrayal or the pain my children experienced. I wouldn't wish divorce on anyone, and I'm sad that Emma and Sophie had to learn about infidelity and deception so young. But I'm grateful for the opportunity to discover who I really am when I stop trying to be who others need me to be. The girls and I have created new traditions and routines that reflect our family as it actually is, not as we used to pretend it was. We have pizza and movie nights every Friday. We take mother-daughter trips where we explore new cities and try new activities. We have honest conversations about relationships, trust, and making good choices. Emma is working on a graphic novel about a superhero mother who saves her children from a villain who pretends to be their friend. Sophie is learning about financial literacy and business management, skills I wish I'd developed earlier in my life. They're both growing into strong, independent young women who understand that they have the power to shape their own futures. As for Mark and Sarah, I rarely think about them anymore. They made their choices and faced the consequences. Mark is working to rebuild his relationship with his daughters, and I support that effort because it's good for Emma and Sophie. Sarah is living with the results of her decisions, and I feel neither sympathy nor vindication about her situation. They were both adults who chose to pursue their desires without considering the impact on the people who loved them. They gambled with other people's lives and lost. The fact that they lost so completely is simply justice, not revenge. My life now is smaller in some ways than it was when I was married, less income, smaller house, more responsibility. But it's also bigger in the ways that matter most. More authentic, more intentional, more aligned with my actual values and priorities. I wake up every morning in a home that belongs to me, with children who trust me completely, working on projects that excite me, building relationships with people who respect my judgment. I go to bed every night knowing that I've been honest with everyone I care about and that I've made decisions based on integrity rather than fear. That's a life worth fighting for. That's a life worth the battle I had to wage to protect it. 6 months ago, I thought my job was to preserve my family at any cost. Now I understand that my job is to build a family that doesn't need to be preserved because it's built on truth from the beginning. Emma just looked up from her homework and asked if she can invite her friend over for dinner tomorrow. Sophie wants to know if we can go shopping for new soccer cleats this weekend. These are the questions that matter now. The immediate, practical, loving questions of daily life with children who feel safe and secure. Of course, I tell them both, already planning how to make their requests happen. This is what victory looks like. Not the destruction of my enemies, but the construction of a life that's so much better than what I lost that I can't imagine wanting the old one back. I never thought I'd be grateful to Mark for cheating on me, but in a strange way, I am. His betrayal forced me to become the woman I was always capable of being, but never had the courage to become while I was trying to be the perfect wife. Now I'm just trying to be the perfect mother. Not perfect in terms of never making mistakes, but perfect in terms of always putting my children's welfare first, always telling them the truth, always showing them what it looks like to stand up for yourself when someone tries to harm your family. I think I'm succeeding. The sun is setting outside our kitchen window, casting golden light across the homework papers and art supplies scattered across our breakfast bar. In a few minutes, I'll call the girls for dinner and we'll talk about their day and make plans for the weekend. It's a good life. It's an honest life. It's the life I fought for and earned and deserve. And tomorrow, it will get even better.